October 8th, 1918, Argonne Forest, France. It was a cold, wet morning. Rain mixed with sleet. Fog hung low over the hills. 17 American soldiers moved quietly through the trees, trying to get behind the German lines without being heard. Their mission? Silence a machine gun position that had been stopping their regiment's advance for 2 days. What happened next was over in a matter of hours. When it was done, one man had killed 25 German soldiers, silenced 35 machine guns, and was marching 132 prisoners back toward American lines, through the same forest he had just fought through, alone. His name was Alvin York. He was a corporal from a farm in Tennessee, and 6 months earlier, he had been standing in front of a military board begging them not to send him to war. They said no. He went anyway. And on the morning of October 8th, he became the most unlikely military hero in American history. Here is what most people think they know about Alvin York. A sharpshooter from Tennessee, a natural soldier, a man built for war who went over there and did what men from the mountains do. That story is wrong. York was not eager to fight. He was not looking for glory. He was, by every account, a man who had spent years trying to reconcile his faith with the world around him. And when the draft came, his first response was to refuse it. He filed for conscientious objector status. He cited his religious beliefs. He told the army he believed killing was wrong. The board denied him. And so Alvin York, the man who would become, in General Pershing's words, the greatest civilian soldier of World War I, shipped out to France not as a warrior eager for battle, but as a man still wrestling with whether he had the right to pull a trigger. That contradiction is the heart of this story. Because what happened in the Argonne Forest was not the act of a man who had made peace with violence. It was the act of a man who had made peace with something harder: duty. York spent weeks at Camp Gordon, Georgia, wrestling with whether he could kill another human being. His company commander, Captain Edward Danforth, and his battalion commander, Major George Buxton, took the unusual step of sitting with York personally, reading scripture with him, debating the ethics of war, giving him the space to work through what most officers would have dismissed as insubordination. They were not trying to break him. They were trying to help him find an answer he could live with. York took a leave to the Tennessee mountains and spent time in prayer on the hillside above his home. He came back without a full answer. He shipped out anyway. He told himself that if God needed him to fight, God would show him why. If not, God would protect him from having to. On October 8th, 1918, he found out which it was going to be. Before we get to the morning of October 8th, you need to understand what the Meuse-Argonne Offensive actually was. It was the largest military operation in American history up to that point. More than 1.2 million U.S. troops, a 47-day campaign from September 26th to November 11th, 1918. The last major Allied offensive of the war, designed to break through the Hindenburg Line and end the fighting before winter. The Argonne Forest was one of the most difficult sectors of that offensive. Dense woodland, steep hills, ravines that turned into kill zones. German machine gun positions dug in so deep that artillery couldn't touch them. York's regiment, the 328th Infantry, 82nd Division, had been stopped cold. Machine gun nests on the high ground were cutting down every attempt to advance. For 2 days, the regiment could not move. 17 men were sent to fix that problem. 17 men. Into the forest, against a fortified German position. Before we meet those men on the morning of October 8th, it is worth understanding who Alvin York was before the Army found him. He was born on December 13th, 1887, in a log cabin near Pall Mall, Tennessee, a hamlet so small and so remote that most maps did not include it. He was the third of 11 children. His father farmed and worked as a blacksmith. The family survived on what they could grow and what they could shoot. There was no surplus. There was no safety net. In a bad year, everyone went hungry. York grew up shooting because shooting fed people. He learned to hunt with a muzzle loader, which meant every shot had to count. There was no quick reload, no second chance. He competed in local shooting matches, where the prize was usually a side of beef or a turkey, and he won often enough that the community knew his name. He also drank and fought and lived the rough life that rural poverty and isolation tend to produce. He was not, by his own account, a man of particular virtue in his early 20s. He got into brawls, he gambled, he caused trouble. Then, in 1915, something shifted. He had a religious conversion, by most accounts sparked partly by grief over a friend's death and partly by the influence of a local preacher. He joined the Church of Christ in Christian Union, a small denomination that took a literal reading of the commandment against killing. He stopped drinking. He stopped fighting. He became, by the time the draft arrived in 1917, a man whose entire community knew him as someone who took his faith seriously. When the army told him to pick up a rifle, he said he could not. Not because he was afraid, because he believed it was wrong. They sent him anyway. The patrol was led by Acting Sergeant Bernard Early. York was one of 3 other non-commissioned officers. Together with 13 privates, they moved off the road and into the trees before dawn. The plan was simple. Get behind the machine gun positions, hit them from the flank, silence them, and open the road for the regiment. They moved carefully, quietly, deeper into German-held territory. And then, something unexpected happened. They stumbled onto a German command post and captured a large group of soldiers without firing a shot. For a moment, it seemed like the mission might actually work. Then, the machine guns opened up. German gunners on the high ground above the ravine saw the Americans and began firing. In seconds, 6 Americans were dead, including York's closest friend, Corporal Murray Savage. 3 more were badly wounded, including Early. The surviving Americans dropped behind whatever cover they could find, guarding their prisoners, pinned down with no clear way out. Command passed to York. What York did next has been analyzed and reconstructed for more than 100 years. He was positioned on the right flank, slightly below the crest of the hill, in a natural depression that gave him cover. The machine gunners were above him and to his front. The angle was bad. The distance was difficult. But York had been hunting in the Tennessee mountains since he was a boy. He had grown up shooting squirrels with a muzzleloader, where a missed shot meant no food and wasted powder. He knew how to shoot under pressure. He knew how to read terrain. He knew how to be patient. He began picking off the machine gunners one at a time, working methodically, each shot deliberate. The Germans could not pinpoint where the fire was coming from. They traversed their guns, looking for the source, and each time a gunner raised his head, York fired. Then, something happened that should have ended it. A German officer and 5 soldiers charged him from the side with fixed bayonets, at close range, moving fast. York drew his Colt .45 pistol and shot all 6 of them in sequence, starting from the last man in line and working forward, the same way a Tennessee hunter shoots at a flock of birds so the lead birds don't hear the shots and scatter. He later said he learned that technique from turkey hunting. The officer leading the charge was the last to fall. The German battalion commander had been watching from the command post below. He had seen his machine gunners cut down one by one. He had seen his charging soldiers fall in seconds. He had seen York, still standing, still firing, appearing, from where the commander stood, to be far more than one man. He concluded that he was facing a larger force than he could see. He climbed out of his position and offered to surrender. York accepted. With his 7 remaining able-bodied Americans, York organized the German prisoners into a column, using the battalion commander himself as a shield in front, forcing him to signal other German positions to surrender as they passed. Each time they moved through a new section of German line, the commander called out, and more soldiers came out with their hands up. It was a remarkable thing to watch, by any account. A corporal from Tennessee, covered in mud, marching through active German territory with a column of over 100 prisoners, bluffing his way through every checkpoint by putting the enemy's own commander at the front of the line. The Germans they passed did not know how many Americans were behind those prisoners. They could hear York's voice, firm and steady, giving orders. They could see their major walking at the front, clearly cooperating. The math of the situation was unclear, and in war, when the math is unclear, men tend to choose survival. York later said the march back was the most frightening part of the day. Not the shooting, the walking. Miles through German-held territory, his remaining men watching the flanks, the column of prisoners shuffling forward, and no guarantee that someone with a clear shot somewhere in the trees wouldn't decide to end it. Nobody did. By the time York reached American lines, he had 132 prisoners. He reported to his brigade commander, General Julian Lindsay, who looked at the column of Germans and reportedly said he had been fighting for 40 years and had never seen anything like it. York's reply, recorded by witnesses, "I surrounded them." It is worth stepping back from the individual story and looking at what it reveals about the larger picture. The Meuse-Argonne Offensive was an operation built on a simple but brutal logic: attrition. Keep pressing, keep moving, accept casualties, and keep the pressure on until the German line breaks. It was the logic of industrial warfare, the same logic that had produced 4 years of slaughter across the Western Front. York's action on October 8th was the opposite of that logic. It was one man, using skill and judgment and nerve, achieving in a few hours what a regiment had failed to achieve in 2 days of frontal assault. The machine guns that York silenced had held up an entire regiment. His patrol, 17 men reduced to 8, removed that obstacle in a single morning. The road opened. The advance continued. General Pershing later estimated that the events of that morning contributed meaningfully to the final push that ended the war 34 days later. The armistice was signed on November 11, 1918. Whether York's actions changed the course of the war is something historians debate. What is not debated is this: without the machine guns on that hill being silenced, the regiment could not move. And the man who silenced them had filed paperwork 6 months earlier asking to be left out of the war entirely. Alvin York came home in 1919 to a reception that surprised him and made him uncomfortable. He was promoted to sergeant. He received the Medal of Honor from General Pershing personally. France gave him the Croix de Guerre. 8 other countries decorated him. The New York Times called him the war's biggest hero. He did not want any of it. He turned down endorsement deals. He turned down an offer from a circus that wanted to put him on display. He turned down commercial arrangements with tobacco companies, clothing manufacturers, and half a dozen other businesses who believed his name could sell things. He turned down a great deal of money at a time when his family had very little. What people found difficult to understand, then and now, is that his refusal was not false modesty. York genuinely did not believe he had done anything worth profiting from. He had been placed in a situation not of his choosing, done what the moment required, and come home. In his mind, the men who deserved recognition were the ones who hadn't. Murray Savage, York's closest friend in the 328th, the man who died in the first burst of German machine gun fire on October 8th, received no parade, no medal, no newspaper story. He was buried in France with the others, and his family in Tennessee got a letter. York thought about that. He said so more than once. He went back to Pall Mall, Tennessee, married Gracie Williams as he had promised himself he would, and spent the next 30 years trying to build a school for the children in his rural community. Not a monument to himself, a school. A practical thing that would give the mountain children around him a chance he never had. When people asked him about the Argonne, he gave the same answer every time. He said he could not take credit for what happened. He believed God had protected him and that the outcome had not been in his hands. It is, depending on your perspective, either the most modest thing a war hero ever said or the most honest. What York understood, and what the newspapers that made him famous perhaps did not, was that the man who went into the Argonne forest on October 8th was not a warrior who had found his calling. He was a man who had been placed in an impossible situation, done what needed to be done, and wanted nothing more than to go home. He had prayed the night before his last leave was denied that God would show him whether fighting was right. His pastor, Captain Pyle, had spent hours with him reading scripture, trying to find an answer. York later wrote that he went into the battle still uncertain, that the certainty only came after, when he understood that he had done something that saved lives, his men's lives, the prisoners he brought back rather than killed, perhaps the lives of men down the road whose advance was no longer blocked. He was not a soldier who found peace in war. He was a man who found peace despite it. Alvin York lived until 1964. He was 76 years old. The school he spent 30 years building, the York Institute, is still open in Jamestown, Tennessee. It serves students today. He never attended a reunion. He never sought out the spotlight. He gave one major interview in his later years and spent most of it talking about his community, his faith, and his belief that the mountain children of Tennessee deserved better than what they had been given. The movie made about him in 1941, Sergeant York, starring Gary Cooper, he agreed to allow only because the proceeds were directed to charity. He watched it once and reportedly said it was too dramatic. Here is what stays with you about Alvin York. He did not want to be a soldier. The system made him one anyway. And inside that system, inside the machine gun fire and the rain and the sleet and the dead friends, he found something that nobody had given him and nobody could take away. He found that he could do the thing that needed doing at the moment it needed to be done, under conditions no one should have to face. And then he went home. There are men who go to war and come back hungry for recognition. There are men who go to war and come back broken. And there are men, rare men, who go to war and come back exactly who they were before, only more certain of what they believed. Alvin York was the third kind. If this changed how you think about what courage actually looks like, not the kind that wants to be seen, but the kind that shows up quiet and goes home quieter, let us know in the comments.